In this video, we begin our journey into the origins of the First World War, a conflict that consumed nations, claimed millions of lives, and reshaped history forever. Before the trenches, before the endless battles, there was Europe in 1914, a continent filled with ambition, rivalry, and pride. The great powers of the age stood ready for war. Germany, Britain, France, Russia, and Austria-Hungary. Each feared the other, each armed itself, each tied by alliances that promised safety, but instead created danger. And in this delicate balance, a single spark was enough to ignite a global inferno. That spark came in Sarajevo, but to understand why it mattered, we must first explore the tensions that had been building for decades. By the early 20th century, Europe was a continent divided. The German Empire, forged only in 1871, had risen with incredible speed. Its factories and shipyards made it an industrial giant, challenging Britain's long dominance. Germany sought its place in the sun, and this ambition alarmed the old powers. Britain, with the largest empire in the world, watched closely as Germany built a navy to rival its own. The naval arms race became a symbol of distrust, with dreadnought battleships launched year after year. France carried an old wound. In the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, it had lost Alsace-Lorraine to Germany. This humiliation lingered, and the French government and people dreamed of revenge. Meanwhile, Russia was vast, resource-rich, and determined to play the role of protector for Slavic nations in the Balkans. Its alliance with France was meant to counter German power. Britain, though long preferring to stay out of continental politics, slowly drew closer to France and Russia, forming what became known as the Triple Entente. On the other side stood the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. In theory, these alliances were designed to prevent war. In reality, they created a dangerous chain reaction. If one nation fell into conflict, its allies were bound to follow. Nationalism also fueled instability. Nowhere was this more dangerous than the Balkans. The Ottoman Empire, once strong, had grown weak, leaving a vacuum of power. Serbia emerged as an ambitious state, eager to unite the South Slavs under its banner. But Austria-Hungary, with its patchwork of ethnic groups, feared this dream. It controlled Bosnia and Herzegovina, territories Serbia wanted for itself. For Vienna, Serbian nationalism was a direct threat to its empire's survival. Crises erupted again and again. In 1908, Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia, angering Serbia and its protector, Russia. In 1912 and 1913, the Balkan Wars further destabilized the region as small nations fought for territory and independence. Each conflict increased mistrust among the great powers. Diplomats often spoke of Europe as a powder keg, armed, unstable, and waiting for a spark. By 1914, armies had grown enormous, technology had advanced, and public opinion in many countries was driven by nationalism and pride. The stage was set. Only a trigger was needed. And it came, unexpectedly, on a summer morning in Sarajevo. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, visited Sarajevo with his wife, Sophie. For the empire, it was a show of strength, but for Serbian nationalists, it was a chance to strike. A secret group known as the Black Hand plotted to kill him. That morning, the Archduke's motorcade made its way through the crowded streets. One assassin threw a bomb, but it missed, injuring bystanders instead. The royal couple continued their visit despite the danger. Later, their driver took a wrong turn. By chance, They stopped directly in front of Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old nationalist. Princip seized the moment. He fired 2 shots. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie were killed. The assassination shocked Europe. In Vienna, leaders saw it as an opportunity to crush Serbia once and for all. But they hesitated, knowing Russia might intervene. Germany, however, offered Austria-Hungary a blank check, promising full support no matter what. Encouraged, Vienna sent an ultimatum to Serbia with demands so harsh they were nearly impossible to accept. Serbia, unwilling to appear weak, accepted most of the conditions but rejected a few. Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914. The fuse had been lit. What followed became known as the July Crisis. Russia mobilized to defend Serbia. Germany declared war on Russia on August 1st and on France 2 days later. To defeat France quickly, Germany invaded Belgium, a neutral country. This violation of neutrality brought Britain into the war on August 4th. In just over a month, all of Europe's great powers were at war. Diplomacy had failed, alliances had trapped nations, and the assassination in Sarajevo had unleashed a catastrophe no one could stop. The war that began in Europe quickly spread across the world. Germany's plan, the Schlieffen Plan, called for a swift victory over France by invading through Belgium, then turning to face Russia. But resistance in Belgium and the arrival of British forces slowed the advance. The war did not end in weeks, as leaders had promised. Instead, it ground into stalemate and trench warfare. Meanwhile, alliances pulled in empires and colonies. Britain and France called upon soldiers from India, Africa, Canada, and Australia. Russia relied on its massive population, though its armies struggled with poor equipment. Japan declared war on Germany, hoping to expand its influence in Asia. In Africa, German colonies became battlefields. Across the seas, navies clashed, and submarines hunted ships. What began as a regional crisis in the Balkans became the First World War. The enthusiasm of early August, when crowds cheered soldiers off to battle, quickly faded. By the end of 1914, millions were dead or wounded. Vast trench lines scarred Europe, stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. New weapons, machine guns, heavy artillery, poison gas, turned the battlefield into a slaughterhouse. The dominoes had fallen one after another until nearly every corner of the world was touched. The war was no longer about a murdered archduke. It was about survival, honor, empire, and the future of nations. The world had entered a conflict unlike anything it had ever seen before. The First World War did not begin with a single cause. It was born from decades of rivalry, ambition, and fear. But it was the assassination in Sarajevo that set the chain reaction in motion. Within weeks, Europe was engulfed, and the world was at war. This was only the beginning. What was expected to be short and decisive became 4 years of unimaginable suffering. Millions would fall before the guns finally fell silent. If you found this story meaningful, subscribe to Forgotten Fronts. More stories of war, battles, and turning points in history are on the way. Together, we will remember the past, so it is never forgotten.